There can be variable costs which contribute to the final price you pay when buying a programmatic impression. The number one cost is paying the supply side to buy that impression. However, there may be other reasons that costs may be added on, and we're going to cover how they work in this training video. At Beeswax, we call these additional cost vendors. Vendors are managed under the admin dropdown in your Buzz UI. There are some standard vendors which you will see. A vendor example can be anything from a verification provider or a viewability provider like MoIIS, third-party data from Bluekai or LiveRamp, Tapad, which Beeswax are partnered with for cross-device. So there's a multitude of vendors, and we make it really easy for you to manage these within Beeswax. There are a lot of standard vendors, which if you target these or use these on your activity, for example, if you add in Bluekai segments for third-party audiences or pre-bid viewability from IIS or Moat, these vendors will be added automatically to your activity. However, there are cases where you may have some custom needs when it comes to vendors, whether that's how you decide to charge your clients or how you calculate your profits. At Beeswax, you have the opportunity to create custom vendors via the new tab in the vendors. To create a custom vendor, you can name it for your own notation, and there are two types of fees which you can choose from. You can choose whether this is a CPM additional fee or a % additional fee. By choosing either one of these, you will then input the fee that you would like to charge. We'll cover a little more later on what CPM and % will do exactly. So really simple to create a custom vendor, and it allows you to have free will to track any additional costs as you see fit. If you do create a custom vendor, it will appear in this list of vendors. And so let's find out where we can add these in. Jumping over to the advertiser campaign line item setup, there are two areas where you can apply vendor fees. Quick reminder, you only need to manually apply a vendor fee if it's that of a custom vendor fee for you. Any standard vendor fees like Moat, IIS, Bluekai will all be automatically done on the back end. So to apply any specific vendor fees, you can do this at the campaign level or the line item level. The reason you would do it at the campaign level would be if you wanted this vendor fee to be applied across all of your line items. You can simply do this via the vendor fees tab when creating the campaign, or go back into the campaign once it's been created. And once you've made your vendor under the admin dropdown, it will appear in your dropdown to select here. So add it at the campaign level if you want the vendor to apply to all the line items underneath that campaign. There can, however, be cases where within a specific campaign, you only want to apply vendor fees to certain line items. A use case for this is using first-party data. You may have only added a first-party data which you charge someone to use onto certain line items under a campaign. In that case, you can add just specific vendors to specific line items underneath a campaign. And it's exactly the same where there's the vendor fee tab on the line item level, and you can click and select the vendor fee that you want to track here. So that's how you add and manage vendor fees. Now we're going to cover what this actually does to your activity. So there's two ways that vendor fees can be tracked. It can either be included in the budgets that you put on the line items, or it can be billed separately to that of the budgets that you input on the campaign or line items. Both at the campaign level and the line item level is where you select your budget type and input your budgets. We have three budget types at Beeswax: spend, spend with vendor fees, and impression. Spend and impression will simply track spend and impression based on the media spend, that is the inventory cost of buying the media. So if you put this $1 budget, that $1 budget will be completely dedicated to buying inventory. If you are targeting third-party audiences or any vendors that provide additional costs, with both of these budget types, that cost will be billed separately to that of your $1 budget. So you would pay $1 budget plus any costs that have been accumulated from the vendors. If you're wanting to control that within our system, we have the opportunity to select spend with vendor fees. By selecting spend with vendor fees, it means that your budgets that you apply within the UI will include the cost it takes to buy the media from the supply side, plus any additional costs, whether they are custom costs that you have created under the vendors dropdown, or any costs that will automatically be added for using third-party data segments or viewability vendors, or any other costs that could potentially add to buying this piece of media. So this is a really widely used budget type. It just avoids any hidden costs at the end of your campaign and ensures that you budget correctly for everything that goes into buying your campaign. So keep in mind those different budget types when setting up your campaigns, and how much money you have to spend and how much you will be able to be billed at the end of your activity. One common question is, do vendor fees affect my CPM bid? The answer is no. Vendor fees will not affect your CPM bid. The CPM bid that you input on the line item is the CPM bid that will be submitted to the exchange. So if you have a CPM in mind, please factor in the fact that this CPM will be, the vendor fees will be added onto this CPM. Great, so that's how you use it within the UI. Now let's look at how we report on it. Jumping over to the performance report, which you will find in the reporting dropdown and select performance report, there are two main fields that you will be able to, let's just add in vendor fee actually. Here we go. Reporting is very easy to use and you can just move around the columns at any point and run. So in reporting, performance report is your report where you look at general delivery against different fields. So in this report, we have selected day, spend, media spend, and vendor fees. So in this case, you think, what is the difference between spend and media spend? We're going to cover at the end in a summary sheet what the differences are, but simply for now, when you have the budget type spend with vendor fees, your spend equals your media spend plus your vendor fees. If you have the budget type spend, your spend and your media spend will be equal, as you can see in this example here, because your spend is equal to only that of buying the media, and any additional vendor fees will be charged separately. So we'll cover that in the summary. It can be quite confusing, but once you've done a couple of examples, it becomes very clear. So this shows general delivery, but we also have a vendor report, which again you can find under reporting and vendor report. This report allows you to get a little bit more granular into what those vendor fees are and what exactly the fee is associated to, so the vendor itself. So here we've pulled the vendor fee name. You can see that there's a multitude of vendor fees, one including our bid shading product, which is charged at 10% of the saving of the bid shade. So there's loads of different examples that can be classed as a vendor fee, whether that's double verify or the serving fees that goes with serving a creative within Beeswax. So you can pull your impressions, your spend and your vendor fees to get a full visual of all the costs and which vendors they're coming from. So let's summarise everything we've covered. Vendors cover any additional costs associated with buying media outside of what you submit as your CPM to the exchange. So a vendor fee does not impact your base CPM bid. To include vendor costs within the budgets you apply at either the campaign or line item level, you must select spend with vendor fees as your budget type. By selecting spend or impressions, vendor fees will be added on to the budgets and spend against line items and campaigns. Third-party costs that are linked with Beeswax, for example, Blue Kai or Moat Viewability, will be automatically added and billed. You do not need to manually add them as a vendor. You should still select spend with vendor fees if you want this included in your budgets that you have inputted, but only custom vendors should be added manually to campaigns or line items, and you can create custom vendors via the admin dropdown. You can add your custom vendors at both the campaign level and the line item level, and your custom vendor can either be in the form of a CPM charge or a % of spend charge. Beeswax supports up to 3 decimal places here. To see a breakdown of your vendor costs, you can use either the performance report or the vendor report. To summarise the reporting, you have the performance report, which will show you the overall spend. If your budget type on the campaign and line item is selected as spend with vendor fees, then you should expect your spend column to be equal to your media spend column plus the vendor fee column. If your budget type is spend or impressions, then you should expect the spend column to equal the media spend column. Your vendor fee column will also be included, but this will be charged additional. For the vendor report, we have given 2 basic examples of what either a CPM vendor would look like or a % vendor would look like. So the 2 additional green columns I've added on for visibility. So the vendor fee, if we had a $1 CPM vendor fee, that is for every 1,000 impressions, we are going to add on $1. So in this case, we've served 10,000 impressions, which is 1,000 times by 10. And so there's 10 1,000s. We're charging $1 per 1,000 impressions. So it's a simple calculation of 1 times by 10. The vendor fee would show as $10. If you have a % vendor fee, so this example would be a 5% vendor fee, it would be based on the spend. You spent $100 and 5% of $100 is $5, and so the vendor fee would be $5. They're 2 simple examples. If you have any further questions about how vendor fees are calculated or applied in Beeswax, please reach out to your account manager or the support team, and we will be on hand to answer any further questions.